Welcome to History Today. Episode 9, People You Should Know from Joliet History.
In this episode, we're going to visit some information about Joliet residents from historic Joliet. None of these people are living today, but each of them made major contributions in the formative years of Joliet. With that said, we're going to take a look at a couple of people who have their last name in common, and that would be William Van Horn and Cornelius Covenhoven Van Horn. Cornelius Covenhoven Van Horn was a Danish guy who came here originally from the East Coast in order to farm. He was a lawyer, educated in the New York area, and he came here to farm and actually did law work on the side for other people. He obviously lived on a farm with his wife and his kids, and there was a big fire on his farm in which, sadly enough, his wife and a couple of his children were killed. His next stop would be Joliet, where he moved. He was remarried, and his son's name was William. Now, Cornelius was a lawyer, and he was very important in getting Joliet legally as a city in Illinois. For that reason, he was our first mayor, and the first stone bridge was actually named after him. Now, his son, his name was William Cornelius. In the Van Horn family, there were like 12 children originally that were actually Cornelius's brothers and sisters, and each of those families had a Cornelius in them. The whole name thing gets a little strange. But anyway, William Cornelius, he was the son of our first mayor, and he was also a railroad guy. His father, when he passed away, left virtually no money for the family to survive on because he was doing pro bono work in the legal field. It became William's job to, help to pay the bills and feed the family. So he went to work on one of the many railroads that passed through Joliet at the time. And from there, he had a really large knowledge of trains and how to build trains and railroad tracks, and was very famous for building a railroad in Canada. So there we have the Van Horns. Now, we also have a lady here. Her name was Adele Faye Williams, and she was born in 1859 in Joliet, and she was the daughter of William Faye, who was one of the earliest photographers in the state, and she kind of picked up art and photography from him, and she studied in Paris, and she not only worked for an art studio for a calendar company doing pictures for calendars and note cards in Joliet, she also wrote for the Joliet paper. Now we're moving on to this gentleman named Sebastian Louis Lager, and I'd like to meet him just for his name alone. I love the name Sebastian. He originally came to Joliet through Mokina. Sebastian Lager went into business with Martin Westphal. He was a German loan and savings bank person. They started the bank. The bank was on Bluff Street. It was actually torn down in 1976 when they made way for Bicentennial Park. It was the last building to be removed at that time. Sebastian Lager is buried at St. John's Cemetery, which is right by my house, and he's got a big monument there. I'd like to meet this guy by the name of Hiram Scott. Mostly I'd like to meet him because they say that the house that he owned is haunted. The house still stands, and it's been owned by several people who say that it's haunted. And I'd really like to be able to talk to him about the building of his house and why he built it there, and other things about the hauntings. But he is kind of an interesting gentleman. He was a Civil War vet who opened H.B. Scott and Company. which was the first barbed wire manufacturer in Joliet, and that happened in 1874. He held 10 patents for varieties of barbed wire fencing. The reason that he built the house where he did on the bluff was so that he could look down over his companies and keep an eye on them, which I think is fairly interesting. Now, we have another guy who was also into barbed wire, metals, and so forth, and his name was John Lambert. You may recognize his name. His portrait hangs in the stairway at the Joliet Public Library. He gave $40,000 for the building of the library. And back when the library was built in 1902, that was a lot of money. Of course, the building of the library cost a little more than that, but he was important in the building of the library. He first moved to Grundy County in 1867, and then he came to Joliet in 1870. He became an officer at the Illinois State Penitentiary, and that's the one on Collins Street. Later, he served as a warden. And then in the 1870s, he helped form Lambert and Bishop, which was a wire and fence manufacturer. In 1892, his company merged with another to become Consolidated Steel and Wire Company, for which Lambert served as vice president and manager. And then in 1899, that company changed its name to American Steel and Wire, and Lambert became its president. He was also a member of the Joliet Public Library Board, and he was on the board until he passed away. Now we've got the Demons, and I not only want to meet Mr. Demon, I want to meet Mrs. Demon. I want to know what it was like to be a pioneering person in Joliet right around 1834. Martin is credited with building the first stone building on Bluff Street, which was once again the first main street in Joliet. He apparently lived in that building and opened his first store in that stone building as well. He died in 1872, and I believe his wife lived a little bit longer than that. Her name was Sophia. It's my understanding that she helped him a lot with the building of the building and the store, and I'd like to know what all that was like that far back. Then there is a doctor who I'd really like to meet. Dr. William Dougal owned a big house. Once again, it was on the bluff, because most people who were prominent lived on the bluff. He was a prominent Joliet figure, the Union captain, chief surgeon for the Illinois and Michigan Canal Division, which is interesting by itself, and a pension surgeon under President Benjamin Harrison. His 14-room mansion located in Joliet was noted for preservation efforts.
Check out these new and exciting programs coming soon to the Joliet Public Library. History of the Bagpipes. Bagpiper Kevin Chapman will be at our Ottawa Street branch on Wednesday, March 25th from 7 to 8 p.m. to introduce us to one of the oldest instruments still played in the world today. This will also include a demonstration of the pipes and display of the regalia. This event is for adults only. Registration is required. Live Costa Rica Virtual Tour. Enjoy the sights and sounds of Costa Rica from the comfort of your own home. Alejandro Cano from Enjoy Virtual Tours Costa Rica will be on hand to present a live virtual tour of San Jose, Costa Rica's capital city. Witness the beauty of a tropical environment and get a peek into the lives of everyday citizens thousands of miles away, while learning about the history, traditions, and architecture of this great city. This event is for adults only. Register for this online Zoom event at jolietlibrary.org. Puppy Yoga. Stop by our Ottawa Street branch on Thursday, March 26th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. and learn gentle yoga poses focused on staying on the floor to optimize cuddle sessions with puppies roaming throughout the room. This event is for adults only. Registration is required. Soap Making 101. The owner of Soapy Roads Lombard will present this eco-friendly class at our Ottawa Street branch on Wednesday, April 8th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Join us for a soap making class and make your own luxurious soap. This event is for adults only. Registration is required.
And now we're going to move on to this guy named John D. Page, who was a little bit of everything for Joliet. He arrived in Joliet from New York in 1844, and he had $1 in his pocket. In 1869, he developed a process of bottling flavored drinks under pressure using carbonic gas. And this is important because every time you open a can of 7-Up or some other drink that's carbonated, you can say to yourself that this is the guy who discovered that. In 1877, he became Joliet's first recognized fire chief. They did have a fire department prior to this, but he was the first chief. He was also the police chief at one time, and he implemented a system of daily written reports. He was also one of the first mayors in Joliet, so he did a little bit of everything in Joliet's youth. Now there is somebody, a female, who comes along a little bit later, although she was born during this time, and that's Molly Zelko. Now, she's Joliet's kind of mythical being. Every city has one. She worked for a newspaper called The Spectator. She was not a quiet person about how she felt. She just said how she felt. And there were some illegal things going on at that time that she spoke out about concerning organized crime. And it is thought that she was kidnapped by these criminals in order to keep her quiet about what she knew was going on. There have been several programs about her. I encourage you to do some research on her yourself and come to your own conclusions. But Molly Zelko, I would really like to know what happened and where she went after she was kidnapped. Now, we're moving on to E.H. Aiken, and he was a guy who had a lot of real estate in Joliet. He, again, was born in New York. Most people came from New York or Pennsylvania, and he made a series of moves from New York to Onondaga County in New York. And then he went to Michigan and then came through Joliet, and he was a farmer. The big thing that I would like to meet him for is because his daughter, Charlotte Aiken, was the first librarian of the Joliet Public Library. Don't know if she had done any librarying before, but I'd like to know her take on being a librarian at that point in time was. And that was back when the library was in a second story of a business building on Jefferson Street. That would be an interesting conversation to have. I'm also interested in this guy by the name of Marcus Cracker. He was born in 1839 and actually not in this country. He was born in Austria, but he had a huge house on Western Avenue. It's actually Western and Center Street. And the house still stands today, and people still live in it. I believe it's an apartment building or something. He came here and married a Prussian immigrant. He had 9 children, and he started out at a shoe store that he started with his brother. And then he began manufacturing cigars. He built his wealth up. I'd like to have a nice long talk with him about how he did that and how he ended up owning a quarry and building his own home using the stones from that quarry. There was a father-son team, sort of, and their names were Cal Riesenzarly and Cal Zarly. During the early history of Joliet through the Civil War, one of the most outspoken voices in the city, his name was actually Calne Zarly, but everybody called him Cal. He was a newspaper editor and at one time the owner of the Joliet Signal. Now his dad's name was Reason Zarly. He was a veteran of the War of 1812 and one of the earliest settlers here. The father and his wife brought their 8 children to Joliet from Pike County, Ohio, and settled on a farm just south of the city. You may recognize his name because there is a cemetery that would have been located at the corner of Zarly Farm at the time. It's called Zarly Cemetery, And many of the people who lived in Joliet and died in Joliet are buried in that cemetery. Also, a lot of people who lived in Joliet at that time are buried in Oakwood Cemetery. And if you drive through there, you'll notice a lot of names that you can compare to street names. Now there's Harlow Niles Higginbotham. He had an estate that was east on Route 30 called Harlow Warden. Big house, very near where Chicago Carnation Company was located. The house itself had greenhouses in it and a fountain, and he worked for Marshall Fields in Chicago. During the Great Chicago Fire, he saved much of what was in their department store at the time and moved what he could to warehouses outside the city of Chicago and brought much of the paperwork that there was to his own home here in Joliet. Many people have said that he and his wife began to have issues with ghosts in their house as well, and they abandoned the mansion, went back to Chicago, but they left the house with all its contents just there. He was involved in the Chicago World's Fair as well. He was actually the president of the World's Fair. And so the next person that I want to talk about is dually important because of that same World's Fair and because he was the architect of the Joliet Library. As you can tell, Joliet Library pops up several times in this podcast. I work at the Joliet Library and feel very strongly about the library. So Daniel Burnham was the architect of this building. He did, however, not live in Joliet, but as I say, he was the architect of this building and several other buildings in Joliet, as well as part of Joliet Central High School. He did the architecture for the White City, which was the city that was built just for the World's Fair. Now, I mentioned Joliet Library, and the person who was responsible for all the rock that was used to build this building was Adam Groth. He was responsible for the stone and the stone cutting that was used for the Joliet Library, the Union Station, the First National Bank, Joliet Township High School, the Post Office, the Woodruff Building, and there's a couple more buildings that are listed. And so now I've come to the end of this particular podcast. We've talked about some important people in Joliet's history. This would be my list of who I would like to meet from the past. If you have any ideas of personalities that you would like to hear about, let me know. I can't arrange a meeting with them, but I can look up information about them. So you can send your ideas to me, and my email address is adrilling@jolietlibrary.org. See you next time.
If you have any questions or concerns about the content of this podcast, please call Anneta Drilling, local history librarian, at 815-846-3112, or email her at adrilling@jolietlibrary.org. I'm Patrick Maloney, and I'll see you next time when history repeats itself.